many more spider people are there?
Welcome back, Screen Ranters. He starred in an Oscar-winning film, and now he's the main character in a video game. Yet still, the world as a whole knows very little about the man, the legend, Miles Morales. As such, we've compiled a list about this amazing version of Spider-Man, filled with all sorts of fun facts and trivia that you can annoy your friends with or random people next to you on public transport. We'll look into his comic history as well as a few fun Easter eggs taken straight from the recent Sony PlayStation game. So, spray paint your Spidey suit and let's get started! All the way back in 2000, Marvel realized their comics had become a tad convoluted and not exactly easy for new readers to jump into due to their decades of continuity. So they created the Ultimate Universe, or Earth 1610 if we're being formal. This universe centered around the question, what if superheroes existed in our real world? A lot of the MCU is inspired from the Ultimate Universe. By 2011, Marvel higher-ups decided to have Peter Parker kick the bucket in a brutal and dramatic way. In the aftermath, this left Morales to take over the mantle of Spider-Man. Then comic shenanigans happened, and Miles ended up in the main 616 universe. But we'll go into that later. Now, the main universe has two Spider-Mans? Spider-Men? I don't know. While it's easy to think Miles is just a Spider-Man clone, not the literal Ben Reilly version, he has a power in his arsenal that other Spider-Man-themed characters do not, a Venom Blast. Miles is able to send a bioelectric shock via touch. It's like an organic taser power. It's painful and can also knock a person out. It can also be used to disrupt technology, which can be helpful if his villain is coated in gadgets. Miles can also channel the power to give his punches more of a zap. He's also able to do a version of Superman's solar flare. Miles can create a mega venom blast that fires out a lot of energy. Another fun power that Miles can use is that he can camouflage himself into his surroundings. Somehow this also involves any clothes he's wearing as well. It's helpful when he needs to be all stealthy and sneak up on his foes, but also if the fight is getting a bit too intense and he needs a breather, just like when he did a Houdini act for the first time in the recent game. He can also beat Doc Ock silly with their own arms. Once Miles arrives in the MCU, he and Drax should face off on who can go invisible the best. Then throw in Sue Storm, and we have a fight for the ages that none of us can see.
Dude.
What makes the perfect hero? That's right, a tragic and distressing origin story. Superman was fired from his planet as it exploded. Black Widow had the Red Room, and Batman had something parents, alleys, bats. Miles follows in this trend by having an uncle that dabbles in being a criminal. If you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, then you know this. If you haven't seen it, well, it's great. Go and see it. Anyway, not only is Aaron Davis the Prowler in the comics, for a time he takes on the mantle of the Iron Spider. Comic nerds will remember this Spidey suit from the Civil War story. Since he was also bitten by a science-inflicted spider, besides the powers we've already mentioned, Miles has many of the same abilities as the classic Peter Parker, one of which is the spider sense. Although Miles' Spidey sense is more powerful than Parker's, it's been said that he has shown signs of being precognitive as a result. Miles also has wall crawling due to his modified spider-esque fingertips and toes, which has definitely got him into trouble at times. Also, Miles has superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, equilibrium, reflexes, durability, and a healing factor to round off his smorgasbord of powers. If you studied every frame of Into the Spider-Verse, you may have noticed that the powered-up spider that eventually nibbles on Miles has Alchemex 42 written on its belly. In the video game Spider-Man Miles Morales, we get to see Miles on social media. His, not actually Twitter, but essentially Twitter account is @BrooklynSpider42. See, the number crops up once again. Well, fans immediately got their geek on and stated this number was a reference to Douglas Adams' book The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, since that's the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. However, one of the directors of Spider-Verse, Peter Ramsey, stated in an interview it's actually a reference to the jersey number of baseball legend Jackie Robinson. When Miles was announced as the new Spider-Man for the Ultimate Universe, not everyone was so delighted. Most were, but some were sulking a bit. They wanted to continue reading about Peter Parker. However, Parker was Spider-Man in the 616 universe. There are decades of Parker stories out there. It was time for a reimagining of Spider-Man. A Spider-Man with a different backstory. The small yet annoyingly loud portion of the fan base got so vocal that one of Miles' creators, Brian Michael Bendis, had the 616 Peter Parker give his approval to Miles in 2012's comic story Spider-Man. Over the years, more and more of those naysayers have been won over by Miles. Even some of the comic characters weren't too delighted with Miles stepping up to the spider plate, as 1610 Peter Parker heroically saved Aunt May and Mary Jane before making the ultimate sacrifice. See what I did there? So when Miles first took up the mantle, his costume was the same as Parker's. People of the universe found that as bad taste, so Miles was eventually given a new costume from the Ultimates, their version of the Avengers. By 2015, the sun was setting on the Ultimate Universe. As such, Marvel decided on a new event called Secret Wars. The story involved the end of the multiverse as we know it. By the end, a new universe was born. During the event, Peter Parker of 616 and Miles Morales found the source of God Doom's power, the Molecule Man, Owen Reese. Yet, the reality warper was a tad snacky. Luckily, Miles had a cheeseburger in his pocket that was weeks old, but Reese isn't fussy and scoffed it down. This act pretty much saved Miles and his family. When the multiverse was recreated, the Morales clan were brought to the main Marvel universe, with, at least at the start, no recollection of their life in another universe. With Marvel soft rebooting their main line of comics, the all-new, all-different initiative came into effect. The Avengers we saw in the MCU were now vastly different to the team in the pages. We had Jane Foster as Thor, Sam Wilson as Captain America, and since this is a video all about a certain Spider character, Miles Morales as Spider-Man. He was joined by other teenage heroes such as Kamala Khan as Miss Marvel and Sam Alexander as Nova in the Avengers. So for a while, Miles was kicking it with Earth's mightiest heroes, until... While there were cracks beginning to show for the teenage heroes in the Avengers, the 2016 Civil War II event was the final straw. In that story, Ulysses, an Inhuman that can apparently see the future, saw Miles slay Steve Rogers. So, the opposing factions of Team Tony Stark and Team Carol Danvers strove to take action. Danvers wanted to arrest Miles for his protection, while Stark took the stance that Miles hadn't actually done the crime. Yep, it was Minority Report, but with superpowers. Afterwards, the teenage humans had little love for the adult counterparts, so they left the Avengers and set up the Champions, which included a bunch of young heroes that were also disappointed by the grown-ups. In the early part of the Miles Morales PlayStation game, we have the section of Miles trying to save people as the bridge collapses. Just before it falls apart, Miles swings in and uses his webbing and his spider strength to hold the bridge together long enough for the civilians to escape. This is a direct reference to the MCU's Spider-Man in 2017's film Spider-Man: Homecoming. There we see Tom Holland's Spidey hold a ferry together after Vulture's weapons decide to split the ship in half. The first Spider-Man game also references the films. This time it was 2004 Spider-Man 2, when the webhead used webbing and his spider muscles to stop a speeding train. Peter Parker isn't the only Spider-Man to have a character that's swine-related in Peter Porker, although Miles' version is a lot less cartoony. Instead, Ultimate Spider-Ham looks more Animal Farm than Looney Tunes. The Miles version even has a pig variation in his name. It's Miles Morhamus. Making his debut in 2014, Morhamus comes from Earth 14094. He arrived in the Ultimate Universe to warn them about the various universes being wiped away in the run-up to Secret Wars. For our eagle-eyed/eared viewers, you may have realized that if Miles is from Earth 1610, what about Miles from 616? Well, he exists. But he isn't what you think. Instead, he's sort of an evil twin, only older. Yeah, we know that's not exactly a twin, but that sounds better than evil, alternate, older variation. Anywho, this Miles sucks. He's a criminal that's BFFs with Wilson Fisk. He eventually makes his way to the Ultimate Universe, pretty much doing a parent trap by switching universes with the cool Miles. Eventually, bad Miles returned to the Prime Universe under the incredibly creative name Ultimatum to mess with Spider Miles. Considering the recently released photos of Haley Steinfeld as Kate Bishop walking the best pup, Pizza Dog/Lucky, this entry is even more nice and relevant. In the Ultimate Universe, Miles had a long-term relationship with Catherine Katie Bishop. She didn't have the fancy arrow firing skills that the 616 version has, but she did have parents that were secretly involved with Hydra. After Miles told her he was Spider-Man, she ran away from him. Not great. Later on, Miles arrived at her house and was drugged and captured by her parents. After escaping Hydra's clutches, Miles broke it off with Katie, which is, understandable considering. Marvel loves to act like Oprah Winfrey and give all the Spider characters traumatic events that are used as motivation. Peter Parker and Uncle Ben, Spider-Gwen and Peter Parker, and of course, Miles has to have a haunting event, which came in 2013. When the police were firing at Venom, a stray bullet fatally struck Rio Morales, his mother. Miles stopped being Spider-Man for a year. Eventually, he told his father, Jefferson Davis, that he was Spidey. Instead of a hug, Jefferson blamed his son for the slaying of his wife and brother, Aaron, and disowned Miles before disappearing. After a number of months, he returned and apologized. What if we told you that video game Miles lives with villains? Mind blown, right? And we aren't talking about the typical Spidey Rogues Gallery. When you go to Miles' apartment, if you take a close look at the intercom, you can see all of his neighbors. It starts cute. There's the book character Waldo, or Wally for our UK viewers. There's also Woody and Buzz from Toy Story, adorbs so far. But then it goes off the deep end, with Cthulhu from H.P. Lovecraft stories, and finally Fred and Jason, which is a nod to the franchise's Friday the 13th with Jason Voorhees, and Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger. Just like the Ultimate Universe's Peter Parker, Miles also had an arachnid that was modified with the Oz formula. Weird how that keeps happening. Instead of making you want to pick up a cricket bat and tell people what is and isn't a knife,
that's not a knife.
This formula is actually what created the Green Goblin as well as the Ultimate Universe. Since Norman Osborn from 1610 has met his demise only to be brought back to life multiple times, the Oz formula seems to hold the key to immortality. Spidey fans like to argue as to whether Spider-Man should have organic webbing or not. Personally, this writer believes he should have organic webbing since that's mostly what spiders are known for. But regardless, to start with, Miles used Parker's old web shooters, but then he developed the ability to create organic webbing with a twist. Instead of the typical thwipping string, Miles can fire out an electro-webbing from his hands. If The Flash, Batman, and 616 Spider-Man have taught us anything, it's that the hero is only as good as their rogues gallery. For Peter Parker, his first supervillain was the Chameleon in The Amazing Spider-Man #1 back in 1963. With that in mind, Miles probably has a memorable first battle with a costumed villain, one that still terrorizes him to this day, right? Not exactly. During his first crime-fighting outing, Miles is wearing a Spider-Man Halloween costume. There he bumps into the Kangaroo. One of the biggest reasons Spider-Man is so popular is due to the costume. As we can't see the face or skin, anyone can theoretically imagine themselves as Spider-Man, which is pretty neat. In 2008, with Barack Obama becoming the first black president of the United States, Marvel decided to have the man pop up in a Spider-Man story. There, Obama states that he's a big fan of the wall crawler. Fast forward to the casting for 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man, one of the biggest names that wanted the role of Peter Parker was Donald Glover. It didn't happen. But he was in the MCU as Aaron Davis and voiced Miles in the Ultimate Spider-Man TV show. In today's real-life landscape, diversity in entertainment is a must. Many of Marvel's top heroes only a couple of decades ago were white men, which after a while gets kinda dull. One of the biggest factors in making entertainment interesting is the different cultures that the characters bring to the table. When looking to create Morales, Marvel decided not only to provide him with African-American heritage from his father, but also Puerto Rican heritage from his mother. If you watched Spider-Verse or played the first Spider-Man game a couple of years ago, you'll know that Miles' dad is a cop, and the comics have Jefferson down in the same profession. However, beyond just being an officer, Jefferson has dabbled with being a spy. He's worked for Nick Fury as an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. In the 1610 universe, he went undercover in a criminal empire for Fury. After the job, Fury offered him a permanent role, but due to the danger, he turned it down. While everyone knows that in order to be Spider-Man, you have to live by the mantra, with great power comes great responsibility. But also, apparently, Spider-Folk start their heroics really young. When Miles first becomes Spider-Man in the comics, he's only 13 years of age. Most 13-year-olds are more worried about puberty than crime fighting. 616 Peter Parker was bitten by the radioactive spider when he was only 15. The Ultimate Universe's Parker was the same age when he was nipped by the creepy crawly. We finish off with the thought that perhaps we could have Doctor Who and Sony's Spider-Man game series in the same universe. During one of the underground side missions, Miles breaks into one of their facilities. For some reason, there are a load of creepy mannequins. When Miles looks away to do a task and looks back, the mannequins have moved. This is a reference to the Doctor Who baddies, the Weeping Angels. who only move when no one is looking at them. That's one of the strangest possible crossovers of all time. And that's a wrap. Do you think Miles will be swinging into the MCU soon? Let us know your theories on how it'll happen below. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. All of those actions really help us out. Finally, thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye, webheads!